The spreadsheet on my screen showed a discrepancy of $47.32. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have called it a rounding error and moved on with their Friday evening. But I wasn't most people, and $47 was exactly how my father's business empire had started to crumble 20 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Small discrepancies that nobody questioned. Babe, you're doing it again, Marcus said from the doorway of our home office, his tone that particular blend of affection and exasperation I'd been hearing more frequently over the past 6 months. It's almost 8. We have dinner reservations at 9. I didn't look up from the screen. The numbers were dancing in front of me, patterns emerging like constellations in a night sky. Transaction ID 847392B had been logged at 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday, but the corresponding invoice showed a timestamp of 2:51 p.m. 4 minutes. Another tiny discrepancy that screamed at me while whispering to everyone else. Just 5 more minutes, I murmured, my fingers already flying across the keyboard, pulling up the auxiliary records. There's something off about the Berkshire account. Marcus crossed the room, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself last summer. He placed his hands on my shoulders, thumbs pressing into the knots of tension that had taken up permanent residence there. Olivia, the Berkshire account is fine. We've been over this. Rachel verified everything last week. Rachel, his assistant, the woman he'd hired 8 months ago despite my reservations, despite the gap in her resume that nobody else seemed to notice, despite the reference from a company that had dissolved 6 weeks before she supposedly worked there. Rachel's verification is what I'm checking, I said, finally meeting his eyes in the reflection of my monitor. Marcus looked tired, but there was something else there too. Something that looked uncomfortably like pity. This is the 3rd time this week you've redone her work, he said gently. The auditors signed off on everything. Our accountant signed off. Even your own team signed off. You need to let this go. I saved my work and closed the laptop with more force than necessary. My father let things go. He trusted people who showed him doctored reports and clean audits. He let $47 become $47,000, and then $4 million, and then everything was gone. I'm not your father's partners, Liv. Marcus's voice had an edge now. And you're not your father. This obsession isn't healthy. I stood, grabbing my purse from the desk drawer. Inside, tucked behind my lipstick and wallet, was the USB drive where I'd been compiling my own records, backups of backups, downloaded before they could be altered, time-stamped and logged with paranoid precision. Marcus called it obsession. I called it survival. The restaurant was one of those places where the servers memorized your name and the lighting was dim enough to hide the prices on the menu. Marcus ordered for both of us without asking, which normally I would have corrected. But tonight I was too busy watching him. Really watching him. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 6 months. I'd met him at a fintech conference in Austin, where I'd been pitching my cybersecurity startup to investors. Marcus had been there representing Thornton and Associates, the boutique financial firm he'd built from nothing into a respected name in wealth management. He'd cornered me after my presentation, bought me a drink, and told me I was brilliant, but that my security protocols were overkill. Nobody is going to put in that much effort to steal pennies, he'd said with that charming smile that had first made me lower my guard. You're protecting against threats that don't exist. But I'd proven him wrong, hadn't I? My startup, SecureThread, had landed 3 major contracts in the first year by finding vulnerabilities everyone else missed. We'd saved our clients millions by catching the small leaks before they became floods. We'd grown to 30 employees, then 60, then 120. And 6 months ago, Marcus had suggested combining our efforts. Think about it. he'd said over champagne and strawberries the night he'd proposed. Your tech, my client base, we'd be unstoppable. And you wouldn't have to work so hard. You could delegate more, trust your team. Trust your team. The same thing Rachel had said during her interview when I'd questioned why she wanted to work as an assistant when her resume suggested she could run her own firm. I want to learn from the best, she'd said with earnest eyes and a firm handshake. Sometimes you have to trust that people's intentions are good. Olivia? Marcus was looking at me with concern. You haven't touched your wine? I picked up the glass, swirled the burgundy liquid. Tell me about Rachel's day today. What did she work on? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Is this really how you want to spend our evening? Interrogating me about my assistant? I'm not interrogating, I'm asking. I kept my voice light, curious. You know, couples talk about their workdays. It's normal. Fine. He cut into his steak with surgical precision. She processed the Henderson transfer, filed the quarterly reports for the Yates account, and coordinated the Peterson meeting for next week. Satisfied? The Henderson transfer, I repeated slowly. The one for $235,000? $238,000, he corrected. Why? I took a sip of wine, buying time. The Henderson transfer had been logged in our system at $235,000. The difference was $3,000. Another discrepancy. Another thread to pull. Just wanted to make sure I had the right number for my records, I said smoothly. You know how I am about details. I do. He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm, familiar. Baby, I love that about you. Your attention to detail is what makes you brilliant. But it's also what's eating you alive. You're seeing patterns that aren't there. Rachel is good at her job. She's thorough. She's reliable. And she's not stealing from us. I never said she was stealing. You didn't have to. He squeezed my hand. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at her. You think she's running some elaborate con. But Liv, sometimes a duck is just a duck. Not everything is a conspiracy. The waiter arrived with dessert. Creme brulee that I definitely hadn't ordered but Marcus knew I loved. A peace offering. I cracked through the caramelized sugar with my spoon, watching the amber shards scatter across the white plate. What if I'm right? I asked quietly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus sighed. Then I will personally apologize and will press charges and do whatever needs to be done. But Liv, you need to consider the possibility that you're wrong, that your trauma from what happened to your dad is making you see threats where there aren't any. I've been thinking, maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, someone who specializes in what? I interrupted. Paranoia? Is that what you think this is? I think you're hurting, he said carefully. And I think that hurt is manifesting in ways that aren't healthy. For you or for us. I set down my spoon. Dessert forgotten. I'm going to prove it to you. Prove what? That I'm not paranoid. That something is wrong. I pulled out my phone, opened my encrypted notes app. Give me 2 weeks. If I can't show you concrete evidence of irregularities by then, I'll let it go. I'll apologize to Rachel. I'll see a therapist. I'll do whatever you want. Marcus studied me across the table, candlelight flickering in his dark eyes. And if I say no? If I ask you to let it go right now? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. This wasn't just about Rachel or the accounts anymore. This was about trust. About whether Marcus believed in me or believed I was broken. Then I guess we have a bigger problem than accounting discrepancies, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. 2 weeks. But you have to promise me something. What? If you find nothing, Really nothing. Not just things you've convinced yourself are suspicious. You'll admit that maybe, just maybe, you need help processing what happened to your father. It wasn't fair, weaponizing my trauma like that. But I nodded anyway, because I knew what I'd find. The patterns were there, clear as day to anyone who knew how to look. And I'd spent my entire adult life learning how to look. We drove home in silence, Marcus's hand on my knee, my head against the window watching the city lights blur past. Our house in Belmont was dark when we arrived, the motion sensors triggering the porch lights as we pulled into the driveway. Marcus had bought the house before we met, but I'd made it ours, painting the walls, planting the garden, installing the security system that he'd joked was overkill for a quiet suburban neighborhood. Overkill is just proper preparedness that hasn't been needed yet, I'd told him. Tonight, as I entered my security code and heard the familiar beep of the system arming behind us, I felt vindicated by every extra precaution. Marcus headed upstairs, loosening his tie. "I'm going to take a shower. You coming?" "In a bit," I called back. "Just want to check my email." I heard his sigh from the second floor, but he didn't argue. The shower started running, and I moved quickly to the office, powering up my laptop and pulling out the USB drive from my purse. I had 2 weeks to build my case, which meant I needed to work fast and smart. The thing about financial fraud is that it's rarely about one big theft. It's about 1,000 small ones, each below the threshold that triggers automatic reviews. Death by 1,000 cuts. My father's partners had stolen from him for 3 years before anyone noticed, and by then the damage was irreversible. They'd been smart, moving money in ways that looked legitimate on paper, creating fake vendors and inflated invoices, skimming a little here and a little there until there was nothing left to skim. I pulled up my master spreadsheet, the one I'd been building in secret for the past 3 months. Red cells marked transactions that didn't quite add up. Yellow cells marked ones that were probably fine but felt off. Green cells were clean. There was a lot more red and yellow than green. The Berkshire account was particularly colorful. 23 transactions in the past 6 weeks, each one processed by Rachel, each one with minor discrepancies in the timestamps or amounts. Nothing big enough to trigger an automatic audit. Nothing that couldn't be explained away as human error or system glitches. But I didn't believe in coincidences. I started with the most recent transaction, pulling up the original documentation from our client portal. Berkshire Holdings had authorized a transfer of $150,000 to their investment account on Monday. The transaction had been processed on Tuesday at 2:47 p.m., according to the main log. But when I checked the backup server, the one only I had access to as part of my security protocols, the timestamp showed 2:51 p.m. 4 minutes. I dug deeper, comparing the transaction ID to the bank's records. The money had left Berkshire's account at 2:47 p.m., but it hadn't arrived in their investment account until 2:51 p.m. Where had it been for those 4 minutes? My fingers moved faster now, pulling up network logs, server access records, anything that could show me the path that money had taken. There was a routing number I didn't recognize, embedded in the transaction data. Not Berkshire's investment account. Not their primary account. Something else. I ran the routing number through every database I had access to. It came back to a small bank in Delaware, the kind of place that specialized in discrete financial services and asked very few questions. The account holder was listed as BHI Consulting, LLC, BHI, Berkshire Holdings Investment. Clever. Create a shell company with a name similar enough to the legitimate client that anyone glancing at the records would assume it was related. Route the money through that account, take your cut, and send the remainder on to its proper destination. The difference would look like a processing fee or a rounding error. 4 minutes and $3,000. I checked the other red flag transactions. Different amounts, different timing, but the same pattern. Money disappearing into brief limbo before arriving at its destination, always slightly less than it should be. And always processed by Rachel. My heart was hammering now, that mix of vindication and anger that came with being right about something you wished you were wrong about. I grabbed my phone to call Marcus, to show him what I'd found, but stopped with my finger hovering over his contact. He'd asked for 2 weeks. If I showed him this now, incomplete and potentially explainable, he'd just say I was seeing patterns again. I needed more. I needed the full picture. I needed to know how deep this went. The shower had stopped running upstairs. I quickly saved my work to the encrypted drive, cleared my browser history, and shut down the laptop. When Marcus appeared in the doorway, hair damp and wearing only his pajama pants, I was standing by the window, looking out at our dark backyard. "You okay?" he asked softly. I turned to him, managed a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." About? About us. About the wedding. The lie came easily. I was wondering if we should move the date up. Why wait until next summer? His face lit up, and I felt a pang of guilt for using his happiness as camouflage. "Really? You want to move it up?" "Maybe, I don't know. Just a thought." I crossed to him, let him wrap his arms around me. He smelled like my shampoo and his cologne, familiar and safe. "I love you." "I love you too," he said into my hair. "And I promise, 2 weeks from now we're going to laugh about all this paranoia." I held him tighter, my cheek pressed against his chest where I could hear his heartbeat, steady and sure. He believed what he was saying. He really thought I was imagining threats, conjuring conspiracies from innocent mistakes, but I knew better. I'd seen this pattern before, lived through its devastating conclusion, and this time, I wasn't going to let it happen. This time, I was going to be the one doing the destroying. The offices of Thornton and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in the financial district, all clean lines and expensive furniture designed to convey trustworthiness and competence. Marcus had built the firm over 12 years, starting with a shared office space and a single assistant, growing it into a respected name, managing over $2 billion in client assets. I'd been coming to the office regularly since we merged our operations 6 months ago, working from the conference room Marcus had converted into a workspace for me. My team at SecureThread operated mostly remotely, but I liked being here, where I could keep my finger on the pulse of both companies, where I could watch Rachel. Monday morning, I arrived early, before the rest of the staff. The security guard, Tom, waved me through with a smile. "Morning, Ms. Chen. You're here bright and early." "Big week," I said cheerfully. "Lots to catch up on." The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to review my plan. I needed access to Rachel's computer, her files, her email. But I needed it without triggering any alerts, without leaving any trace that someone had been looking. Fortunately, I was very good at not leaving traces. Rachel's desk sat outside Marcus's office, a strategic position that gave her control over his schedule and access to his clients. The desk was meticulously organized, color-coded files, a sleek monitor, a photo of what she claimed was her niece, but I'd reverse image searched and found on a stock photography site. Small lies often preceded bigger ones. I sat at my temporary desk in the conference room, visible through the glass walls to anyone who cared to look, and pulled out my laptop. The beauty of being the cybersecurity expert was that no one questioned why I needed admin access to everything. I'd set up Thornton and Associates network security myself, which meant I had backdoors even Marcus didn't know about. I pulled up Rachel's activity logs from Friday. She'd stayed late, logging out at 7:43 p.m. Marcus had left at 6 to meet me for dinner. That gave her almost 2 hours alone in the office with full access to his computer, his files, his client accounts. I traced her activity minute by minute. She'd processed 4 transactions, updated 6 client files, and sent 11 emails. Standard stuff. But at 7:22 p.m., she'd accessed the backup server, the one that supposedly only I could access. My blood went cold. I dug deeper, pulling up the access logs. She'd used an administrator code I didn't recognize, bypassing the security protocols I'd put in place. She'd downloaded something, but the logs had been scrubbed, the data trail carefully erased. Not carefully enough. I had backups of backups, security measures nested within security measures. My father's downfall had taught me that the first line of defense was never enough. By the time I traced through 4 layers of redundant logging systems, I found what she'd taken. Client account numbers, routing information, access codes, everything someone would need to replicate what I'd discovered with the Berkshire account. Everything someone would need to set up a systematic, nearly undetectable embezzlement scheme. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots, saved everything to my encrypted drive. This was it. This was the proof Marcus needed to see that I wasn't paranoid, that Rachel was. "Morning, Olivia!" I jumped, nearly dropping my laptop. Rachel stood in the doorway of the conference room holding 2 coffee cups, her smile bright and unsuspecting. She was pretty in an unthreatening way. Blonde bob, minimal makeup, clothes just expensive enough to suggest competence without arrogance. "I brought you a latte," she said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "Figured you could use the caffeine? Marcus mentioned you've been working long hours." I stared at the coffee, my mind racing. Was this innocent? Or was she sending a message showing me she knew my schedule, my habits? "Thanks," I managed. "That's thoughtful." "Of course. We're all on the same team, right?" She lingered in the doorway, and I could feel her eyes on my screen even though I'd already minimized the incriminating windows. "What are you working on?" "Just some security updates," I said casually. "Routine maintenance." "You're so good at all that tech stuff. I barely understand how to use Excel beyond basic formulas." She laughed, self-deprecating. "Marcus is lucky to have you. For his business and, everything else." There was something in the way she said "everything else" that made my skin crawl. But her face remained open, friendly. Either she was innocent and I was losing my mind, or she was very, very good at this. "He's lucky to have good people around him," I said, holding her gaze. "People he can trust." "Absolutely." She smiled wider. "Trust is everything in this business." "Oh, speaking of which, I need your signature on some security protocols Marcus wanted updated. Just confirming that our client data protection meets the new federal standards. Do you have a minute?" She pulled out a tablet, pulled up a document. I scanned it quickly. It looked legitimate. Standard boilerplate about data encryption and access controls. But embedded in the 3rd paragraph was language that would give her administrative access to systems she shouldn't be able to touch. She was testing me, seeing if I'd read carefully or just sign. "I'd like to review this more thoroughly," I said, not taking the tablet. "Can you email it to me?" A flicker of something. Annoyance? Frustration crossed her face before the smile returned. "Of course, I'll send it right over. Take your time." She left, and I immediately pulled up the document she'd tried to get me to sign. The metadata showed it had been created Friday night at 7:34 p.m. during her after-hours office session. She'd been setting up her next move, creating legitimate-looking paperwork that would give her the access she needed. But she'd made a mistake. She'd underestimated me. I spent the next 3 hours building my case, cross-referencing transaction logs with server access records, tracing money as it flowed through shell companies and mysterious accounts. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look for it. Rachel had been skimming for at least 6 months, probably longer. Small amounts from large accounts. Careful never to take enough that anyone would notice. Except I'd noticed. By the time Marcus arrived at 11, fresh from a client breakfast, I had a file ready. Not complete. I still had another week and a half to gather evidence, but solid enough to show him I wasn't crazy. "Hey babe," he said, poking his head into the conference room. "How's your morning going?" "Good. Do you have a minute? I want to show you something." His face grew wary. "Is this about Rachel again?" "Just look." I turned my laptop toward him, pulled up the Berkshire account analysis. "See these timestamps? And these routing numbers?" He studied the screen, his expression unreadable. I watched hope and dread war in my chest, praying he would see what I saw, praying he would believe me. "Liv," he said slowly, "this looks like standard processing delays. Banks don't transfer instantly, you know that. But the routing number is probably an intermediary account. Lots of large transfers get routed through multiple banks for security purposes." He squeezed my shoulder. "Baby, this is exactly what I was talking about. You're so deep in the details that you're seeing conspiracy where there's just normal business operations." "But she accessed the backup server?" "She has admin access," he interrupted gently. "I gave it to her last month when you were visiting your mom. We needed someone else who could handle security issues when you weren't available." The floor seemed to tilt under me. "You gave her admin access? Without telling me?" "I didn't think I needed to tell you. She's my assistant. She needs to be able to do her job." His voice was patient but firm. "Liv, you're doing it again. You're finding sinister explanations for mundane things. This is what paranoia looks like." I stared at him, this man I'd agreed to marry, and felt something crack in my chest. He didn't believe me. Even with the evidence right in front of him, he chose to believe I was broken rather than believe his assistant was stealing. "Okay," I said quietly, closing my laptop. "You're right. I'm seeing things that aren't there." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you. I know that wasn't easy to admit. But this is good. This is progress. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Go get a massage, decompress a little." "Yeah, maybe I will." He kissed my forehead and left, already pulling out his phone to handle the next crisis. Through the glass wall, I could see Rachel at her desk, typing on her computer. She glanced up, caught my eye, and smiled. She knew. Somehow, she knew I was onto her, and she knew Marcus didn't believe me. But she'd made one critical error in her assessment of the situation. She'd assumed that Marcus's disbelief would stop me. She didn't know about my father. Didn't know how I'd watched him beg his partners to listen, to look at the numbers, only to be dismissed as paranoid and difficult. Didn't know how I'd sat in the courtroom and heard those same partners claim ignorance while my father's reputation was destroyed along with his company. Didn't know that I'd spent the last 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. I packed up my laptop, waved goodbye to Tom the security guard, and drove home. But instead of getting a massage, I went straight to my office and pulled out the USB drive. If Marcus wouldn't listen to me, I'd find someone who would. I opened my email and composed a message to Special Agent David Park at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We'd worked together 2 years ago when Secure Threat had helped investigate a client's suspected embezzlement. He'd told me if I ever found something worth investigating, to call him directly. I attached my preliminary analysis, the transaction records, the screenshots of Rachel's after-hours access. Then I hesitated, finger over the send button. Once I did this, there was no going back. The FBI would open an investigation. They'd freeze accounts, interview employees, tear through Thornton and Associates records. If I was wrong, if Marcus was right, and I was seeing patterns that didn't exist, I'd destroy his business, humiliate myself, and probably end our relationship. But if I was right, I thought about my father, about how different things might have been if someone had listened to him sooner, about all the other people Rachel might steal from in the future if no one stopped her. I hit send. The response came faster than I expected, within 30 minutes. Agent Park wanted to meet, tomorrow morning, his office. He'd reviewed my preliminary analysis and found it extremely concerning. I wrote back confirming the meeting, then sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I'd done it. Set in motion something that couldn't be undone. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Working late tonight. Rachel found some issues with the Yates account that need immediate attention. Don't wait up. I read the message 3 times, looking for hidden meanings. Was this legitimate? Or was Rachel creating an excuse to be alone with him in the office, working her way deeper into his trust while she robbed him blind? Or was I so far gone that I couldn't tell the difference anymore? I texted back a simple, "Okay, love you." Then I went upstairs to our bedroom, opened the safe in my closet, and pulled out the documents I'd been keeping there. My own private insurance policy. Copies of everything important. Bank statements, client contracts, security protocols, my father's case files from 20 years ago. I added the USB drive to the collection, closed the safe, and sat on the edge of our bed. Tomorrow, I would meet with the FBI. Tomorrow, this would all become official, real, irreversible. Tonight, I would sit in our beautiful house with its overkill security system and its refinished floors, and I would wonder if I was saving us or destroying us. The line between paranoia and preparedness had never felt thinner. The 3 weeks passed like a slow-motion car crash. Each day, I woke up next to Marcus, watched him get ready for work, kissed him goodbye knowing that federal agents were building a case that would destroy his life. Each night he came home, sometimes early, sometimes late, always with stories about projects and clients that I now knew were half-truths at best. I documented everything. The hidden camera in our living room caught conversations where Marcus talked on the phone with Natasha, his voice dropping to intimate whispers when he thought I was in the shower. I photographed every receipt left carelessly on the counter. I noted every late night, every changed plan, every small lie that built into a mountain of deception. Diana called me every few days with updates. The FBI had executed search warrants on the shell companies. They'd interviewed employees at Sterling & Associates under the guise of a routine audit. They'd traced the money from the fake vendors to the offshore accounts, then to a joint account Marcus and Natasha had opened in the Cayman Islands. "We have enough," Diana told me on day 19. "We're moving on Friday." Both arrests will happen simultaneously. Marcus at the office, Natasha at her apartment. We'll need you to be somewhere safe when it goes down. "I want to be at the office," I said. "You promised." "Emma, I said I'd see what I could do, but having you there when we arrest him, it's irregular. It could compromise the case." "Diana." My voice was steady, cold. "I gave you this case. I handed you 2 years of evidence on a silver platter. I want to see his face when he realizes what I've done. I've earned that." She was silent for a long moment. "Fine. But you stay back. You don't speak to him. You're there as a witness, nothing more. Can you handle that?" "I can handle anything." Friday morning arrived with autumn rain. Marcus woke early, unusually anxious. I watched him check his phone 3 times during breakfast, his jaw tight. "Everything okay?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Fine. Just a big meeting today with Dad. Partnership stuff." He forced a smile. "Wish me luck." "Good luck," I said, and meant it. He'd need more than luck where he was going. He kissed me goodbye at 7:30. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then I called Diana. "It's happening at 10, she said. "Meet me at the field office at 9:30, we'll go together." I dressed carefully. Black slacks, a white blouse, my hair pulled back. professional, composed. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw the woman I used to be, before I'd tried to bury her under casual clothes and a softer life. This was who I really was. Someone who saw the truth in numbers, who couldn't look away from patterns even when they broke her heart. I drove to the FBI field office through the rain, my hands steady on the wheel. Diana was waiting with 2 other agents, the same ones who'd reviewed my evidence. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 3 weeks." We took 2 unmarked cars to Sterling and Associates. The architecture firm occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the West Loop. I'd been here dozens of times for company events, holiday parties, the summer gathering where I'd first met Natasha. Now I was coming to watch it all burn down. We arrived at 9:50. Diana and her team moved with practiced efficiency, flashing badges at the receptionist, requesting Richard Sterling's immediate presence. I stayed back, as promised, but I could see everything. Richard Sterling emerged from his office, his distinguished face creased with confusion. "What's this about?" "Mr. Sterling, I'm Special Agent Diana Chen with the FBI. We have a warrant for the arrest of Marcus Sterling and Natasha Brennan on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Is your son in the building?" I watched the color drain from Richard's face. There must be some mistake. Marcus wouldn't. "Sir, we have substantial evidence." "Is he here?" "He's in his office, 3rd floor, but I don't understand." Diana was already moving, her team flanking her. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding but my mind clear. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward. We found Marcus in his corner office, the one with windows overlooking the Chicago River. He was on the phone, laughing at something, his feet propped up on his desk. He looked so relaxed, so confident. He looked up as Diana entered, his smile fading. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then standing. "Can I help you? Marcus Sterling?" Diana held up her badge. "FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." The color drained from his face. "What? This is insane. I don't know what you're talking about." "We have evidence of approximately $2.4 million embezzled from Sterling and Associates over the past 2 years through fake vendor schemes. We have email communications between you and your co-conspirator Natasha Brennan. We have bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts. You have the right to remain silent." "This is a mistake," Marcus said, but his voice shook. "I want my lawyer. I'm not saying anything until—" That's when he saw me. I'd stepped into the doorway, just far enough to be visible. Our eyes met across the office and I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. "Emma?" His voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" I didn't say anything. I'd promised Diana I wouldn't speak, but I didn't need to. My presence said everything. "You?" His face contorted with disbelief, then rage. "You did this? You went to the FBI?" Diana stepped between us. "Mr. Sterling, you need to come with us now." "Emma, what the hell?" Marcus tried to move toward me, but one of the agents grabbed his arm. "I don't understand. Why would you—" "Sir, you need to stop talking." Diana's voice was firm. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at me, and I could see his mind working, trying to understand how his paranoid fiancé had become his worst nightmare. "You've been spying on me," he said. "You've been going through my things, my accounts, my emails. That's illegal. That's—" "Everything I found was in accounts I had legal access to," I said quietly, breaking my promise to stay silent. "Our shared credit card, our joint accounts. The household computer. Your father's firm's public records. I didn't break any laws, Marcus. Unlike you. You broke into my email. Your password was my birthday. You gave me access years ago and never changed it. Not my fault you forgot. I watched the reality settle over him. He'd been caught, completely and thoroughly, by the woman he'd dismissed as too trusting, too paranoid, too focused on the wrong things. Emma, please. His voice changed, became pleading. You don't understand. The money, it was for us, for our future. My father was never going to make me equal partner. I had to. You had to steal? I finished. You had to lie to me every day for months? You had to sleep with your assistant and plan a life with her while I picked out our wedding flowers? The office went silent. Diana glanced at me, a warning in her eyes. But I couldn't stop now. I know about Natasha, I continued. I know about the apartment in LA. I know about the firm you were going to start together. I know everything, Marcus. Every email, every payment, every lie. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, something like fear. How long have you known? Long enough. And you've just been, what, playing along? Pretending everything was fine? I learned from the best, I said. Diana touched my arm gently. Emma, that's enough. Then to Marcus, we need to go. Now. They cuffed him, right there in his corner office with its view of the river. Richard Sterling stood in the doorway, his face gray with shock, watching his son be arrested. Other employees had gathered in the hallway, their faces shocked, confused. As the agents led Marcus past me, he stopped, looked me in the eye. I loved you, he said. That was real. Even with everything else, that was real. I met his gaze steadily. No, Marcus. You loved what I represented. The woman who didn't ask questions. The woman who believed your lies. You never loved me. You didn't even know me. They took him away. I watched him go, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow relief. Diana turned to me. We're picking up Natasha now. Do you want to? No. I'd seen what I needed to see. I'm done. Richard Sterling approached me slowly, his hands shaking. Emma, was it you who found this? Yes. How long have you known? 3 weeks since I contacted the FBI. Longer since I started suspecting. His eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you come to me? I could have handled this privately. Now the firm. The family name. With respect, Mr. Sterling, this wasn't a family matter. This was a federal crime. Your son stole $2.4 million. He was planning to steal more, and he would have kept stealing until someone stopped him. But the publicity is what happens when you commit crimes. I softened my voice slightly. I'm sorry. I know this hurts. But Marcus made his choices. I just made sure there were consequences. He nodded slowly, aged 10 years in 10 minutes. What about you? The wedding? There's no wedding. I pulled off my engagement ring, held it out to him. This belongs to your family. I don't want it. He took it with shaking hands. I'm sorry. For whatever he did to you. I thought I raised him better. You raised him to think he was entitled to whatever he wanted. That's not quite the same thing. I left him there and walked through the office, past the staring employees, past Marcus's secretary who was crying into her hands. I took the elevator down and walked out into the rain. My phone buzzed. A text from Diana. Natasha Brennan in custody. Clean arrests. You did good work, Agent Park. Agent. She'd called me that once before, when she'd tried to recruit me full-time. I'd turned her down, too scared of the darkness I'd seen in financial crimes, too afraid of becoming consumed by the hunt. I wasn't afraid anymore. The next few weeks were chaos. The story broke in every Chicago media outlet. Sterling Architecture heir arrested in embezzlement scheme. The articles included Natasha's photo alongside Marcus's. Some included mine too. identifying me as the whistleblower fiancé. The media attention was intense but brief. I gave one statement through Diana, explaining that I'd discovered evidence of fraud and had a legal obligation to report it. I didn't mention the affair. That was personal, and I was done making my pain public. Marcus and Natasha were held on bail. His father put up the money, though the look on Richard's face at the bail hearing told me he was only doing it because Marcus was still his son. The disappointment was visible. Their lawyers tried to argue entrapment, illegal surveillance, a dozen different angles. But my documentation was too thorough. Every piece of evidence had been obtained legally. Every step of my investigation had been careful and defensible. The trial was set for 6 months out. Diana told me they'd almost certainly take a plea deal. With the evidence we had, fighting it would just mean longer sentences. I moved out of the loft 3 days after the arrest. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by memories of a life that had been a lie. I found a small apartment in Logan Square, closer to the photography studio I'd been neglecting. My phone rang constantly for the first week. Friends asking if I was okay. Marcus's mother crying and asking me to explain what had happened. Former colleagues from my forensic accounting days reaching out, some offering support, others offering jobs. Diana called on day 10. "Emma, I want to make you an offer. I'm not coming back to the FBI. Just hear me out. You're brilliant at this work. The Sterling case. You built that investigation from scratch in under a month. Most of our agents would take 6 months to compile what you found. And you did it while maintaining your cover, gathering evidence without tipping off the suspects. That's exceptional work. I don't want to be exceptional at finding fraud, Diana. It costs too much. What if you could do it on your own terms? Consulting work. Contract basis. We bring you cases. You work them at your pace. No full-time commitment. No pressure." I was silent, thinking. What kind of cases? Financial crimes, embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. The cases where we need someone who can see patterns others miss. You'd work from home, maintain your photography business, have complete control over your schedule. But when we need you, you'd be available. I'll think about it. Take your time. The offer stands. I hung up and looked around my new apartment. It was small, but mine. The walls were bare, waiting for photos I'd taken. My camera equipment sat in neat cases by the window. My laptop, the one with all the spreadsheets and evidence, sat on the desk. 2 lives, waiting to be chosen. But maybe I didn't have to choose. Maybe I could be both. The artist who saw beauty in moments, and the hunter who saw patterns in numbers. Maybe the trauma of the past month hadn't broken me. Maybe it had just reminded me who I really was. I opened my laptop and pulled up Diana's email with the case details she'd mentioned. A hospital CFO suspected of stealing from cancer patient funds. The evidence was scattered, incomplete. They needed someone who could pull the threads together. I looked at it for a long moment, feeling the familiar pull. The need to hunt, to find the truth. To make sure there were consequences for people who thought they were untouchable. Then I opened my photo editing software and pulled up the wedding I'd shot the previous weekend. A happy couple, genuine smiles, real love. Both existed. Beauty and corruption, truth and lies, love and betrayal. I could see them all. That was my gift and my curse. 3 months later, I sat in federal court as Marcus and Natasha changed their pleas to guilty. Marcus got 8 years. Natasha got 6. They'd have to pay full restitution, though Richard Sterling had already quietly returned the stolen money to cover the firm's losses. Marcus looked at me once across the courtroom. I looked back, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. After the sentencing, I walked out into the spring sunshine. Diana was waiting on the courthouse steps. "How are you?" she asked. "Better, actually better, not just pretending." "Good." She handed me a file folder. New case, nonprofit director, possible grant fraud. Interested? I took the folder, flipped it open. Numbers and statements and patterns waiting to be found. I'll look at it. That's all I ask. I went home to my apartment, now decorated with my photographs on the walls. Weddings and portraits and landscapes, moments of beauty I'd captured. On my desk sat the case files Diana kept sending, patterns of corruption I'd unravel. 2 lives, no longer in conflict. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Emma Park? Yes? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I got your number from Agent Chen. She said you might be able to help me. The woman's voice was shaking. I think my business partner has been stealing from our company. I have receipts, strange charges, but I don't know what to do. I opened a new notebook, grabbed a pen. Tell me everything. Start with the first time you noticed something wasn't right. As she talked, I started taking notes. Dates, amounts, suspicious patterns. My hand moved across the page with practiced efficiency, organizing chaos into clarity. This was who I was. Not paranoid, not broken, not too damaged to trust. I was someone who saw the truth when others looked away. Someone who couldn't ignore patterns even when they hurt. Someone who believed that love and justice weren't opposites. They were both ways of demanding that people be better than their worst impulses. Marcus had called me paranoid for seeing what he wanted to hide. He'd tried to make me doubt myself, to make me believe that my vigilance was weakness. He'd been wrong. My vigilance had been the strongest thing about me. It had saved me from wasting my life on someone who didn't deserve it. It had brought criminals to justice. It had reminded me that I didn't have to choose between being soft and being strong. I could be both. I was both. Jennifer, I said, interrupting her anxious rambling, I'm going to help you. But first, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we investigate your partner, and if we find what I think we're going to find, there's no going back. You'll have to see the truth. You'll have to act on it. Can you do that? She was quiet for a moment. Yes. I need to know. Even if it hurts. Then let's begin. I pulled up a new spreadsheet, started organizing the information she was giving me. Numbers filled the cells, patterns emerged. The familiar focus settled over me, the clarity that came from hunting through data for the truth. Somewhere in a federal prison, Marcus was learning what it costs to underestimate someone, to dismiss their concerns, to call their careful attention paranoid, to believe that love meant blind trust rather than honest partnership. I hoped he learned the lesson. I hoped Natasha did too, but whether they did or not, I'd learned mine. I'd learned that trusting my instincts wasn't paranoia, that demanding honesty wasn't weakness, that refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths wasn't a flaw. It was strength, and I was done apologizing for it. 6 months later, I stood in my photography studio, hanging prints for my first solo exhibition. The theme was Truth and Beauty, photographs paired with abstract representations of financial data. Art and evidence, side by side. Diana came to the opening. So did Jennifer Walsh, whose business partner was now facing fraud charges thanks to the case we'd built together. Richard Sterling came too, older but steadier, rebuilding his firm's reputation brick by brick. I owe you an apology, Richard said, looking at the photographs. I blamed you for the publicity, for exposing Marcus. But you saved the firm. If he'd continued, the damage would have been catastrophic. I know, I said simply. And Emma? Thank you. For having more integrity than my son did. I accepted his handshake, his thanks, and watched him leave. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Marcus. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I needed to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I was a coward and a thief, and I threw away the best thing in my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What I lost. Who you really are. You're extraordinary, Em. You always were. I read it twice, then deleted it. Some apologies came too late. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. But I'd rebuilt myself. That was enough. I looked around at my exhibition, at the evidence of the life I'd created from the ashes of betrayal. Photography that captured truth. Consulting work that exposed lies. A balance I'd forged between beauty and justice. Marcus had called me paranoid for seeing patterns. He'd been wrong. I wasn't paranoid. I was awake. I was aware. I was someone who refused to close her eyes to uncomfortable truths, and I wouldn't apologize for that ever again. The exhibition was a success. The consulting work kept coming. My photography business grew. I dated eventually, carefully, with eyes wide open. I learned to trust again, but differently. Not blindly, but with full awareness that trust must be earned and maintained, not simply given and forgotten. I was happy. Not the naive happiness I'd had with Marcus, built on illusions and willful ignorance. This was a deeper, harder-won contentment. The satisfaction of living honestly, of using my gifts without shame, of refusing to dim my light for anyone's comfort. One evening, a year after Marcus's sentencing, I sat in my apartment reviewing a new case. The numbers spread before me, telling their secret story of fraud and deception. My camera sat nearby, ready for tomorrow's portrait session. 2 lives, perfectly balanced. I smiled and got to work. Because this was who I was. Someone who saw the truth in everything. The beauty and the corruption, the love and the lies. And I was done pretending to be anything else. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.